She was a billionaire in a Navy suit, untouchable and unstoppable. He was a struggling single father with oil-stained hands. Their worlds were never meant to collide until her daughter fainted in his arms, and a DNA test revealed a secret that would shock them all. The heat of August clung to the waterfront of Seattle, turning the steel of the bridge into a glowing ribbon. Ava Collins gripped the steering wheel of her Tesla, jaw tightening as the dashboard flickered with warnings she didn't have time for. The hum of the engine faltered, and in the middle of the lane, the sleek car gave a final shudder and went silent. Her pulse leapt. She glanced at the time. 40 minutes until she was expected in a boardroom uptown. 40 minutes until investors from New York logged in to decide whether her company's expansion would rise or sink. This was the one day she couldn't afford a delay. In the back seat, Mia swung her little legs, oblivious to the urgency that coursed through her mother. Her hair was tangled from the summer wind, her cheeks still pink from the sun. The tablet on her lap glowed with a bright sketch of a giant ship, painted in crude blues and reds. "Look, Mom," she said, tapping the screen with excitement. "It's the biggest ship in the world. And it never sinks, right?" "Not even in storms," Ava forced a smile, though inside she wanted to scream at the uncooperative machine. "Of course not, Captain. It just needs a good navigator. We'll be moving again in no time." Her voice was steady, the same calm tone she used with investors and journalists, but she could feel the sweat prickling at the base of her neck. Behind them, horns started to blare. Not aggressive, but impatient. She flicked on the hazard lights and pressed the button to release the hood, though she knew she had no idea what she would find under it. A Tesla was not a car one fixed by hand, but standing there, looking like she was doing something, gave her a sense of control. She stepped out, heels clicking against the concrete, the fitted navy suit she wore catching the sun, as if to remind everyone watching that she was composed, unshaken, untouchable. Inside, her heart was racing. A rumble of an older engine pulled up beside her. She looked up, shielding her eyes as a dented blue pickup rolled to a stop. The door opened, and a man climbed out. Tall, shoulders broad, dark hair in disarray as though he had been too busy with the world to care about mirrors. His hands, when he wiped them on a rag pulled from his pocket, were streaked with grease, knuckles marked with pale scars that spoke of years of labor. "You look like you could use a hand," he said, voice low and calm, with a hint of amusement. He glanced at the lifeless Tesla, then at her suit, then back again. "Jack Carter, mechanic, 36. He smirked faintly at his own introduction. "And yes, that sounded like a classified ad. Sorry about that." Ava narrowed her eyes, but there was no mockery in his tone, only a quiet steadiness. "It's the battery," she said, though she had no idea. "It just shut down." Jack leaned under the hood, his hands moving with certainty, fingers brushing over wires and connectors as though he had been born knowing them. "Not the battery," he murmured. "Your car's too new for that. More likely the fuse connection. See here." He pointed, then glanced at her and seemed to remember she was not a fellow mechanic. "Sorry, old habit. I talk to machines like they're people. Sometimes they answer back." Mia had climbed halfway out of the back seat, curiosity lighting her face. She held her tablet up to him. "This is you," she said proudly. On the screen, beside her massive cartoon ship, was a stick figure with messy hair holding a wrench. Underneath, in crooked letters, she had written, "Super Ship Jack." Jack chuckled, shaking his head as though he hadn't smiled in weeks. "That's a first. Usually I'm just, 'Hey, mechanic,' but I'll take Super Ship Jack." Within minutes, he had adjusted a fuse, reset the system, and the Tesla hummed back to life. Ava exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by the familiar instinct to pay, to settle debts before they became entanglements. She reached for her wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Jack waved her off. "Nothing. Consider it a roadside rescue. Besides," he added, nodding at Mia, who beamed at him, "I already got paid." Ava paused, startled by the simple kindness. She was used to transactions, invoices, contracts. Nothing came free in her world. And yet here was this stranger, hands stained with oil, giving her something she hadn't expected. Not just help, but the reminder that not everything had to be a deal. For a moment, their eyes met. Hers were sharp, brown, defensive, used to reading intentions. His were darker, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had seen storms and chosen to stand through them. The sound of honking cars drew her back, and she blinked, breaking the connection. "Thank you," she said quickly, ushering Mia back into the car. The girl was still giggling over her drawing, waving goodbye as though Jack had been part of their lives forever. Ava slid behind the wheel, the hum of the engine smooth again, and pulled away. But as she checked the rearview mirror, she saw Jack watching them leave, his figure framed against the sunlit bridge. The city skyline rose ahead, her world of glass towers and endless deadlines. But the memory of his hands, steady, unhurried, certain, lingered with her longer than she wanted to admit. Jack Carter's world could not have been further from Ava Collins's. Where hers was made of glass towers, conference rooms, and calendars packed to the edge, his was measured in the rhythm of engines, the rattle of tools, and the occasional silence of a boy's questions at bedtime. He lived on the edge of the city in a modest single-story house with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered when the wind picked up. It wasn't much, but it was home. Warm, worn in, and steady, the kind of place where every dent and scratch had a story. Inside, the small living room carried the marks of his 6-year-old son, Lucas. A half-finished Lego tower claimed one corner of the coffee table, crayon sketches of rockets and race cars decorated the fridge door, and on the couch sat a stuffed dinosaur missing an eye. Lucas was a quiet child, not shy exactly, but careful. He studied the world with the same scrutiny his father used on engines, as though taking it apart piece by piece to see how it worked. Losing his mother so young had left its mark, and Jack had learned to read the boy's silences as well as other parents read laughter. Jack worked long hours in his garage, a squat brick building that had once been his father's. The sign above it, Carter's Garage, had faded from blue to a weary gray, but he never replaced it. There was pride in keeping it as it was, the way his old man had left it. Most days were simple. Oil changes, brake repairs, the occasional engine rebuild for customers who couldn't afford to buy new. It wasn't glamorous, but there was a quiet satisfaction in coaxing life back into machines. He liked the way engines responded to patience and steady hands. People were harder. It had been only a few days since the incident on the bridge when Ava drove her Tesla into his shop. The car didn't belong in a place like his. The sleek silver body gleamed against the chipped concrete floor, out of place among the rusted mufflers and oil-stained rags. Jack had been bent over a carburetor when he heard the smooth electric purr outside. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped out. And there she was, Ava, stepping from the car with the same poised precision she had shown that day on the bridge. Her navy suit was immaculate, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks in a speech. Mia followed close behind, carrying a paper bag of stickers. Lucas, who had been crouched in the corner piecing together a tiny Lego car, froze at the sight of the strangers. He glanced at his father for assurance, then at Mia, who marched over with a grin and offered him the bag. "Here, you can put them on your cars. I've got 2 of the same kind. My mom says sharing makes people smile." Lucas blinked, hesitated, then reached out. His fingers brushed hers as he took the bag, and for the first time that day, Jack saw his boy's lips twitch into a small smile. Ava stood watching the exchange, her face softened in a way Jack hadn't seen before. She wasn't the stern executive he had glimpsed on the bridge. In that moment, she was just a mother, watching her child connect with another. She caught Jack's eyes, then quickly turned away, pulling a tablet from her bag as though remembering herself. "The car's still not right," she said, businesslike. "I need it checked properly. I can't afford another breakdown." Jack leaned against the fender, folding his arms. "I'll run diagnostics, see what it tells me. These cars aren't simple. No hammer and wrench will do. But we'll get her steady again." Ava gave a sharp nod, already scrolling through notes on her tablet. Her voice was clipped when she added, "I'm buying property near the waterfront. An old dock. I want to turn it into a community center. Workshops, training programs, a place where kids can build skills that actually matter. I need someone who can run the technical side. Someone practical." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Why are you telling me this? I'm not exactly a suit and tie hire." "That's the point," she replied, finally looking up. Her brown eyes were intense, unwavering. "The kids I want to reach don't need more lectures. They need someone who can show them how things work. Someone real." He let out a breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. "Lady, I fix cars. I don't run programs. And I definitely don't stand in front of groups with a PowerPoint." Perfect, she said, her lips curving just slightly. I'll do the PowerPoints. You just keep being the man who talks to machines. There was a silence then, not uncomfortable, but weighted with something neither wanted to name. Lucas had already returned to his Lego car, sticking a bright red flame sticker on the hood. Mia clapped her hands and declared it a supercar. The children laughed, the sound light and natural, filling the shop with an energy Jack hadn't realized was missing. As he bent down to start work on the Tesla, Jack thought about the strange overlap of their lives. Hers was a world of millions, strategies, and headlines. His was one of bolts, grease, and late-night dinners of boxed macaroni with his son. Yet here she was, standing in his garage, asking for his help not just with her car, but with something bigger, something that touched the very community he had grown up in. He tightened the wrench and glanced over his shoulder at her, still absorbed in her screen, posture elegant even in this oil-stained corner of the city. And for the first time, he wondered if perhaps their worlds, though so different, were not meant to stay apart forever. The storm didn't begin with thunder. It came with headlines. One morning, Ava woke to her phone vibrating on the nightstand, the screen flashing with alerts from half a dozen business news outlets. Collins Logistics accused of crushing small businesses, environmental violations in expansion project. Investors question Collins' stability. The words hit her chest like stones, each one designed to sink her faster than the last. She scrolled through the articles, jaw tight, eyes narrowing at the deliberate spin. None of it was new. Minor disputes with suppliers, permits that had been cleared months ago, audits that had passed without issue. But someone had stitched the scraps together and painted a picture of a ruthless woman standing on the backs of the people she claimed to serve. She didn't need to guess who was behind it. Her competitors had been circling for months, waiting for her to stumble. And Blake Morton, her ex-husband, was too smooth, too connected not to have had a hand in it. He had always been a man who knew how to weaponize a smile. By midday, the markets responded. Analysts on TV questioned whether her company could weather the storm, whether she could weather it. The stock dipped, not catastrophic yet, but enough to make her investors restless, enough to set tongues wagging. And then came the blow that wasn't financial. A letter from her lawyer, crisp and official, petition for custody modification. Blake was suing for custody of Mia. His claim was simple but cutting. Ava's world was unstable, her judgment flawed, her choices reckless. He painted her as a woman too consumed by power and profit to provide a safe environment for her daughter. In his carefully chosen words, she was a liability as a mother. Ava read the petition once, twice, her hands shaking even as her face remained cold and unreadable. She had faced hostile boards, arrogant investors, reporters who tried to corner her. But this was not business. This was her child. That night, long after she had put Mia to bed, Ava stood at the sink with her sleeves rolled up, scrubbing plates she didn't need to scrub. The water was scalding hot, the soap harsh against her skin. She focused on the sting, on the mundane rhythm of washing and rinsing, because it was easier than letting the panic in. In the quiet apartment, the sound of water running was the only thing keeping her upright. Meanwhile, in his small brick garage across town, Jack Carter was closing up for the night. He had heard the rumors. Everyone in the neighborhood had. People talked about Ava Collins like she was a myth, a queen in a tower of glass. But he had seen her in his shop, not as a headline, but as a woman standing too straight, too still, holding herself together with sheer will. And when she came by the next evening, her Tesla humming like nothing had ever been wrong, he saw the cracks more clearly. She walked into the dock property she had bought, papers in one hand, her phone buzzing in the other, her eyes sharp but her face pale. The teens she had hired to help paint the walls scattered to give her space, sensing the storm around her. Jack was there, sleeves rolled up, installing a compressor, his shirt damp with sweat. He caught her out of the corner of his eye. Ava leaning against a stack of crates, shoulders drawn tight, lips pressed thin. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. He simply set down his wrench and walked over, wiping his hands on the same rag he always carried. She looked at him, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and exhaustion, and for the first time, she didn't try to disguise it. "I can't afford to break," she said, her voice low, steady, as though she were daring herself to believe it. If I do, everything collapses. My company, my daughter's future, everything I've built. I don't get to break. Jack studied her for a moment. His own life had been a series of breaks, losing his wife, raising Lucas alone, scraping by with the garage. But he had learned that sometimes survival wasn't about not breaking. It was about having someone to stand with you when you did. I'm not a headline hero, he said finally. His voice was calm, steady, the way it was when he explained an engine to a nervous customer. I won't save your company with a press release, but I know how to stand next to someone when the storm hits. And sometimes that's enough. Ava blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her: money, status, power. Jack wanted nothing. He only offered presence. It was disarming in a way she hadn't expected. For a long moment, they stood in the half-finished dock, the smell of paint and oil in the air, the murmur of teenagers laughing in the distance. Ava's phone buzzed again in her hand. Another message, another demand. She silenced it, slid it into her pocket, and for the first time in days allowed herself a breath that wasn't edged with fear. The storm was far from over. She knew that. Headlines would keep coming. Blake would not back down easily. But in that moment, standing on the cracked concrete floor of an old dock, with a mechanic who had nothing to gain and nothing to prove, Ava felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone. At school, the spring assignment was simple in theory but monumental in practice: my hero. Each child was told to choose someone who inspired them, someone they could look up to, and to create a project, an essay, a picture, whatever they wanted, that showed why. Most of the kids picked celebrities, athletes, or the occasional firefighter from the local station. Some pasted magazine cutouts of actors, others printed Wikipedia pictures of astronauts. Teachers expected Mia Collins, the daughter of one of the city's wealthiest and most visible women, to write about her mother or some powerful figure her family knew. But Mia surprised everyone. She chose Jack. When Ava found out, it was late at night, after a long day of meetings and damage control. She had opened Mia's backpack to check for homework and found a folder labeled in her daughter's handwriting: My Hero. Inside were photographs Mia had taken on her tablet, crooked, sometimes blurry, of Jack's hands as he worked in the garage. Not his face, not his body, just his hands. The strong, scarred knuckles, the grease under his nails, the careful way he held a wrench like it was an extension of himself. Underneath the pictures, Mia had written in her careful, uneven letters: My hero fixes the hearts of machines and makes sure we can keep going when they stop. He talks to engines until they listen. He is brave because he helps without asking for anything. Ava had to sit down after reading it. For a long time she stared at those words, her chest tight, torn between an ache and an unfamiliar warmth. She had spent her entire life being the one people admired for power, for achievements, for winning battles. And yet her daughter had chosen someone who didn't care about wealth or status, someone whose only power was in his quiet steadiness. A mechanic who had entered their lives by accident and now held her daughter's trust so completely that she called him a hero. The next morning, Mia presented her project to the class. She stood in front of her peers with a poster board covered in printed photos of Jack's hands, stickers around the edges for decoration. She spoke with the certainty only a child could carry. This is Jack, she said proudly. He's not famous, but he helps people. He fixed my mom's car when nobody else could. He fixes machines so they don't give up. And he taught me that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear old jeans and smell like oil. Her classmates laughed softly, but it wasn't mocking. The teacher, moved by the unusual choice, took a picture of the poster and posted it on social media with the caption, "Sometimes children see the world more clearly than we do." By afternoon, the post had gone viral. People shared it thousands of times, praising Mia for her honesty, admiring Jack without even knowing him. For Ava, it was a rare stroke of good news. For weeks, she had been drowning in negative press and hostile speculation. But this story, her daughter's truth, cut through the noise. For once, the narrative wasn't about ruthless deals or corporate battles. It was about a little girl and the quiet man she called a hero. Jack found out in the most unexpected way. That evening, when he stopped at a gas station to pick up milk for Lucas, the cashier looked at him strangely, then asked, "Hey, are you the mechanic kid called a hero?" Jack blinked, confused, until the man pulled out his phone and showed him the viral post. There were his hands, unmistakably his, plastered across screens all over the city. He muttered something awkward, paid for the milk, and left quickly, his ears burning. He wasn't used to attention, especially not the kind that labeled him something he never claimed to be. When he walked into the dock later that night to finish some work, Mia was waiting with a grin. "Everyone liked it," she said, holding up her tablet to show him the comments. "See? I told them you're a hero." Jack crouched down, resting his hands on his knees, and looked her in the eye. "Mia, I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who fixes cars." She shook her head stubbornly. "Number heroes are people who don't leave when you need them. You didn't leave." He had no response to that. Her words pierced something inside him, something raw and unguarded. He thought about Lucas at home, about the years of trying to be both father and mother, about the countless nights he had sat alone, wondering if he was enough. And here was this little girl, not even his own, at least not yet in any way he understood, looking at him with certainty and telling him he mattered. But the joy of the day collapsed suddenly that evening, when Mia's laughter turned into silence. They were at the dock, Ava reviewing blueprints while Jack tightened bolts on a compressor. Mia had been skipping around with a paintbrush, decorating one of the beams with bright yellow stars. Then, without warning, her face drained of color, and her small body swayed. The paintbrush clattered to the floor. "Ava!" Jack shouted as he lunged forward, catching Mia before she hit the ground. Her limbs felt too light, her skin clammy against his arms. Ava was there in seconds, her face pale, her voice trembling in a way he had never heard before. "It's her blood," Ava stammered, brushing Mia's hair from her forehead. "She has a rare type. When she was younger, there were episodes, low blood pressure, fainting. It's been years since the last one. I thought—" Her words broke off as her hands fluttered helplessly over her daughter. Jack's heart pounded in his ears, but he didn't waste time. "We need a hospital. Now!" The ride was a blur of flashing lights and Ava's ragged breathing. At the hospital, doctors rushed Mia into emergency care. Ava gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, trying to answer every question the nurse fired at her. When the doctor emerged, his expression grave, the words that came from his mouth were like a blade. "We need blood. Rare type. We don't have a match in the system." Jack stepped forward before he had time to think. "Test me." They looked at him skeptically, but he didn't flinch. Minutes later, the results came back. A perfect match. Against the sterile white of the hospital, the words sounded almost unreal. His blood was exactly what Mia needed. Lying on the bed with a needle in his arm, Jack watched the red line flow through the tube, watched the color return to Mia's cheeks through the window on the other side of the glass. Ava stood there, her hands pressed flat against the cold frame, tears streaking silently down her face. She didn't look like the powerful woman the world saw her as. She looked like a mother terrified of losing her child. For Jack, the moment carved itself deep inside him. He hadn't planned this, hadn't expected any of it. But as his blood saved Mia's life, he felt something shift, as though a line had been drawn between them that could never be erased. And Ava, standing outside that glass, realized the same thing. The news came not with fanfare, but with a folder of papers the hospital handed to Ava 2 days later. The crisis had passed. Mia was stable, her breathing even again, her cheeks flushed with the healthy pink that returned only after the transfusion. Jack had gone home exhausted, pale from the blood loss but unwilling to admit it, and Ava had sat at her daughter's bedside all night, stroking her hair and whispering promises she was terrified she might not keep. When the doctor returned, he carried a file in his hands and a complicated expression on his face. He asked if they could speak privately. Ava followed him into a small consultation room, her heels clicking softly against the tile, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her lungs. Jack was already there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, as though someone had asked him to wait. His eyes were sharp, but there was a nervous tension in his posture she hadn't seen before. The doctor cleared his throat. "We ran the compatibility test before the transfusion, as we always do. The match was remarkable, almost too perfect. Standard procedure required additional genetic testing to confirm. And those results just came in." He set the folder down between them. "Mr. Carter isn't just a compatible donor. The genetic markers indicate a direct biological relationship. He is Mia's father." Ava froze. For a moment the words did not make sense, as though the air itself had warped. She blinked, staring at the doctor, then at Jack, who was equally stunned. Her mind flicked back to a time 8 years earlier. Back when she was 25, the company still fragile and new, and she had been standing in another sterile clinic. She had wanted a child, but not the instability of another adult in her life. The donor program had offered her a way forward, a choice she believed was both safe and anonymous. She had never looked back. Her voice when it came was brittle. That's not possible. The donor was anonymous. Jack's jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through his hair, before speaking in a low, steady voice. 8 years ago, I was broke. Lucas had just been born, and the bills were crushing. I was working 2 jobs, still barely making it. I sold plasma, blood, and once I signed up for a donor program. It was supposed to be confidential. I didn't know where it went. His eyes flicked to Ava, then to the folder. Now I do. The silence that followed was thick and unbearable. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, every beat echoing with disbelief. She turned to the doctor. Are you absolutely sure? The doctor nodded. The probability of error is statistically non-existent. The markers are too specific. He closed the folder, his tone softening. This is not something that happens often, but it does happen. Ava sank into the chair, her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. She had built her life around certainty, around controlling every variable, every risk, and now fate had dropped the most unpredictable truth in her lap. Jack Carter, the quiet, steady mechanic who had appeared on a bridge when her car broke down, who had stood beside her when storms rose, who had risked his own body to save her child, was not just a stranger tied to her by circumstance. He was bound to her by blood. Jack paced the small room, shaking his head as though trying to clear it. All this time, I had no idea. If I'd known, his voice cracked, then steadied. I would have been there. From the start. Ava's throat tightened. She wanted to lash out, to demand why, to question the universe for weaving their lives together this way. But she saw the raw honesty in his face, the weight of guilt he didn't deserve to carry. He hadn't abandoned Mia. He hadn't even known she existed. We have to tell her, Ava whispered finally, but not as gossip, not as another story for people to use against us. She deserves the truth. She deserves to hear it from both of us. Jack stopped pacing. His eyes softened, though the storm in them hadn't passed. You're right. She deserves everything. But Ava... He hesitated, searching for words. This changes everything. For her. For us. The words hung in the air, and Ava felt the truth of them sink into her bones. Her carefully ordered life, her fortress of control, had shifted on its foundations. For years, she had believed she had chosen a path that kept her safe, that gave her daughter stability without complication. And yet here was complication, written in blood and DNA, undeniable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't need to look to know it was Blake's lawyer or another headline demanding comment. For the first time, she ignored it. She looked instead at Jack, at the way his hands flexed as though he wanted to reach for something, but didn't know if he was allowed. There was fear in her chest, yes, but also something else, something terrifying in its own way. Hope. When they left the hospital room together, the air outside felt heavier, brighter, like stepping into a world that had shifted overnight. Nothing looked different, but everything was. Ava walked beside Jack, their steps uncertain but in rhythm, the unspoken truth binding them closer than either had ever imagined. And though she didn't say it out loud, Ava knew the revelation was not just a shock, it was a key. A door had opened that could never be closed again. They decided not to wait long. Children, Ava knew, had a way of sensing when something was being kept from them. Mia was sharp, curious, and more perceptive than most adults gave her credit for. If they tried to hide this, she would notice. She would see the hesitation in Ava's eyes, the way Jack looked at her now, and she would fill in the blanks with her own fears. Ava refused to let her daughter live with shadows where there should be light. So they prepared. Ava spent the evening sitting on the couch with Mia's baby book in her lap, the one she had kept from the very beginning, with photographs of her first steps, her first words scribbled in the margins, a pressed flower from the park Mia had toddled through when she was barely walking. The book smelled faintly of lavender from years in her drawer. Ava ran her fingers over the pages, remembering the decisions she had made alone, the nights when she had held Mia and promised her that she would never lack for love. Back then, love was all Ava had to offer, but she had offered it fiercely, without compromise. Jack, for his part, was restless. He paced outside, sitting sometimes on the porch steps, rubbing his hands together, staring at the ground as though answers might appear between the cracks in the wood. He had raised a child before, he reminded himself. He knew how to be a father. And yet this was different. This wasn't Lucas, who had grown into his arms since birth. This was a girl who already had a life, already had a mother, already believed her world was set. Jack was afraid of breaking that world by stepping into it. When the time finally came, they didn't dress it up. No distractions, no rehearsed speeches, just the three of them in Ava's living room. The soft glow of a lamp, the hum of the city beyond the windows, the faint crinkle of paper as Mia flipped through her notebook of drawings. Mia, Ava began gently, her voice steady, though her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Sweetheart, there's something important we need to talk about. Something about Jack. Mia looked up immediately, her brown eyes bright. Jack? Did he fix the car again? She grinned. He's good at that. Ava's heart squeezed. Yes, he is. But it's more than that. She glanced at Jack, who swallowed hard and nodded for her to go on. You know how I told you that when you were born, I made a choice to have you with some help? Mia tilted her head, curious. Like, from a doctor? Yes, Ava said softly. From a doctor. There was someone who gave us something very important. Something that made it possible for me to have you. She reached for her daughter's hand, her thumb stroking over the small knuckles. What we didn't know until now is that person wasn't a stranger after all. It was Jack. For a long moment, the words hung in the air without meaning. Then Mia's eyes widened, her mouth parting in surprise. She looked from Ava to Jack, searching their faces as though trying to fit puzzle pieces together. You mean, he's my real dad? Jack's chest tightened. He leaned forward, his voice low, careful, filled with more emotion than he intended. Mia, I didn't know, not until now. But yes, I'm your father. Not instead of your mom, never instead. But I am part of you. And I will always, always be here if you want me to be. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Ava braced herself for confusion, for tears, for rejection. But Mia's face softened. Her small shoulders lifted, then settled, as though she had decided something important. Then I have two dads, she said simply. One who lived inside a bank of frozen stars, she mimed holding something glowing in her hands, and one who fixes ships and cars. She paused, her expression serious now. But Blake isn't a dad. He's just someone from the news. Ava's breath caught, tears blurring her vision. She pulled Mia into her arms, holding her tight, pressing her face into her daughter's hair. The scent of paint and crayons and childhood clung to her. Jack sat still, stunned, his throat working as he fought to keep his composure. The acceptance, the innocence of it, was overwhelming. They stayed like that for a long time. Ava with her arms wrapped around Mia, Jack sitting close enough that his presence was unmistakable, but not overwhelming. Slowly the tension drained from the room, replaced with something warmer, steadier. Later that week, when Ava's enemies tried to twist the story, when whispers of illegitimacy and scandal began to rise, she made a decision that shocked even her closest advisors. She told the truth herself. She stood in front of cameras, not as the polished CEO in her Navy suit, but as a mother, speaking plainly about the choices she had made, the daughter she had raised, and the extraordinary coincidence that had revealed Jack's role in their lives. It wasn't a corporate statement. It was a confession of love and honesty. The world didn't react with scorn. To Ava's surprise, it reacted with respect. The headlines shifted. People shared her story not as gossip, but as a testament to resilience and courage. But none of that mattered as much as the look in Mia's eyes that night, the certainty with which she had claimed Jack as her father, without hesitation. That moment, in the small glow of their living room, had changed everything. Jack sat with them long after Mia had fallen asleep, her head resting on Ava's lap, her tiny hand still clutching his. He looked at Ava then, really looked at her, and saw not the powerful businesswoman the world tried to tear down, but a woman who had fought for her child against all odds. And she, in turn, saw not just the mechanic who fixed her car, but the man whose blood now ran in their daughter's veins. The man who had given them both something she hadn't known they were missing: hope. And together, in the quiet of that night, they both realized the truth. Their lives would never be the same again. The morning of the court hearing began under a gray sky, with rain dripping steadily from the edges of the courthouse roof. Ava stepped out of the car dressed in a slate gray suit that fit like armor. Her hair pulled into a severe knot at the base of her neck. She looked composed, powerful, untouchable, exactly as she wanted the world to see her. But inside, her chest thudded with the sharp rhythm of fear. She had faced investors who could move billions with a single decision, journalists who had tried to corner her with traps disguised as questions, and rivals who wanted to see her empire collapse. None of it had shaken her the way this did. This wasn't about her business, or even her reputation. This was about Mia. Jack walked beside her, his steps heavier, his presence solid like the ground itself. He wasn't dressed like a businessman. He wore a clean navy shirt and a simple jacket, clothes that made him look both out of place in the marble halls and yet striking in his honesty. He didn't need polish to command attention. His very steadiness drew it. Ava glanced sideways at him, and though he didn't speak, she felt his quiet promise. I'm here. Whatever happens, you're not facing it alone. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and damp wood. Blake Morton was already there, sitting at the petitioner's table with his lawyer. Blake looked exactly as Ava remembered. Perfectly groomed hair, a tailored suit, that flawless politician's smile he used in business and in marriage alike. It was the same smile that had once charmed her, back when she was young and believed charisma meant sincerity. Now she saw it for what it was: a weapon. The proceedings began with formality, the judge presiding in a calm, detached voice. Blake's attorney launched into his argument first, painting Ava as unstable, her world as toxic, her daughter's well-being as jeopardized by corporate wars and personal scandal. He spoke with rehearsed conviction, each word carefully chosen to cut deep. He referenced the recent headlines, her sleepless nights, even her decision years ago to conceive through a donor. Every detail was twisted into evidence of her supposed recklessness. Ava sat still, her face an expressionless mask, though her nails dug crescents into her palms beneath the table. She refused to give Blake the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Then her lawyer spoke. He didn't thunder or dramatize. He laid out the facts: Ava's stability as a provider, Mia's thriving health and education, the home life built with consistency and love. He spoke of Ava's devotion, of her careful balance between running a business and raising her daughter. And then he turned to the unexpected revelation, the one Blake had hoped to use against her. Jack was called to the stand. He walked forward slowly, his shoulders square, his voice even as he was sworn in. The courtroom quieted as he began to speak. He told them about the donor program, about the years of not knowing, about the shock of discovering the truth through a hospital test. He admitted his guilt, not guilt for abandoning a child, but for not knowing she existed. He spoke of how, the moment he had found out, he stepped forward without hesitation. His voice cracked when he described Mia fainting at the dock, how he had carried her in his arms, how his blood had brought her back. And then, almost as if he had rehearsed it, Jack pulled out documents, records from the old clinic, medical files, timelines that proved the truth of his story. His honesty filled the room, so stark against Blake's polished rhetoric that it was almost painful. He didn't try to be eloquent. He only tried to be real. But it wasn't Jack alone who tipped the balance. Halfway through the hearing, the teens from the dock arrived. A small group, nervous but determined, holding a flash drive and a signed affidavit. They had come forward with something unexpected, a recording they had captured weeks earlier. On it, a security contractor from one of Ava's rival companies admitted to staging an accident at the dock, dropping a container, damaging equipment, hoping to create evidence against her. The teenagers had overheard it while working on a project, had the presence of mind to record it, and now under oath, they confirmed what they had witnessed. The judge leaned back, his expression grave but thoughtful, as the evidence played. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Ava kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, unwilling to let herself believe yet, unwilling to break her focus. When all testimonies were finished, silence filled the room as the judge reviewed the evidence. Finally, he set his glasses down and spoke. Mr. Morton, the court finds your petition for custody modification lacks merit. Ms. Collins has provided a stable, supportive environment for her daughter, and the recent revelation of Mr. Carter's biological relationship only strengthens the presence of loving guardians in this child's life. The court sees no reason to remove or reduce Ms. Collins' custody rights. Furthermore, the evidence regarding deliberate sabotage of Ms. Collins' business will be referred to the appropriate authorities. Blake's smile faltered for the first time. His jaw tightened, his composure cracking as he realized he had lost. Ava didn't allow herself to look at him. Instead, she turned slightly toward Jack. His face was unreadable, but when she reached beneath the table and took his hand, he didn't hesitate. His grip was strong, grounding, a wordless assurance that this battle at least was over. As they walked out of the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, a pale strip of blue stretching across the sky. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, questions shouted. Ava ignored them all. She held her head high, her hand still in Jack's, and walked down the steps with the dignity of a woman who had been tested and had not fallen. For the first time in weeks, her lungs filled with air that felt light. The storm had not destroyed her. It had passed and she was still standing. And when she glanced at Jack, she realized something even more powerful. She wasn't standing alone. 6 months passed, and the old dock that had once stood abandoned and rusting by the waterfront had transformed into something alive. The air there smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, of sea salt and oil. Where broken boards and graffiti had once claimed the space, there were now rows of workbenches, neatly organized tools, and the hum of machines that teenagers were learning to master under careful supervision. The sign above the entrance read in bold new letters, Carter and Collins Community Dock. The name alone carried a story, one the city already knew, of a businesswoman and a mechanic, of a child who connected them, of a community that had rallied behind them. The opening ceremony was small but meaningful. Ava arrived in the navy blazer she had worn the day her car had broken down on the bridge, though now it felt different on her shoulders. It was no longer armor, it was a reminder of the road she had traveled to reach this moment. She walked through the crowd with confidence, shaking hands, offering smiles that were not forced but genuine. Her daughter clung to her hand at first, then dashed off to join Lucas and the other children in decorating the final beam with painted stars. Jack was already inside, setting up the last pieces of equipment. He wore a clean shirt and a pair of white sneakers Mia had insisted he buy. Heroes don't wear shoes that blend into asphalt, she had told him with the firm logic only a child could manage. They need shoes that say, I'm here. And so he wore them, a little awkwardly, but with the quiet acceptance that had always defined him. When the speeches began, Ava stood at the front of the dock and looked out at the small crowd of parents, volunteers, and teens who had helped make the dream real. She didn't speak like a CEO that day. She spoke like a woman who had fought storms and survived, like a mother who had learned that strength wasn't in never breaking, but in rebuilding stronger each time. Her words were simple, about community, about opportunity, about the power of honest work. Yet they carried more weight than any boardroom presentation she had ever given. When she finished, there was applause, not thunderous, but warm and lasting. She looked at Jack, who was leaning against a beam at the side, his arms crossed, watching her with an expression that was steady, proud, and a little awed. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had endured to stand here together. As the sun dipped lower, turning the water gold, the crowd began to thin. Volunteers packed up, children laughed as they ran down the dock, their sneakers slapping against the wooden planks. Mia tugged at Jack's hand, then Ava's, pulling them both toward the edge where the water lapped gently against the pier. When you first saw me, Jack asked quietly, his voice low enough that only Ava heard, what did you think I was? She smiled faintly, her eyes on the horizon. A man who wasn't afraid to stop on a bridge when everyone else drove past. A man who didn't hesitate to get his hands dirty when someone needed help. I thought, if he can stop in the middle of the road, maybe he can stop storms too. Jack let out a soft laugh. And I saw a woman in a navy blazer holding herself like she carried the weight of the world. I thought, if she can steer through that, maybe she can steer through anything. Mia, impatient with the weight of grown-up words, squeezed their hands together tightly. You know what I think? Home is where the ship doesn't sink. And we're home now. Neither Ava nor Jack answered right away. The words settled between them like an anchor, rooting them in a truth so simple, so undeniable, that it brought tears to Ava's eyes. She bent and kissed the top of her daughter's head, then let Mia pull them both into a run down the length of the dock. Jack laughed as he stumbled to keep up, Ava kicking off her heels so she could race barefoot across the boards. The three of them ran together toward the edge, the water shimmering beneath them, the wind catching Ava's hair, Mia's laughter ringing like a bell, Jack's deep voice carrying over it all. For once, there was no court, no scandal, no headlines chasing them, just the rhythm of their steps and the certainty of their hands joined together. At the end of the dock, they stopped, breathless, gazing at the open water as the last light of day spilled across it. The future stretched out like that horizon, wide, uncertain, but full of promise. And for the first time in a very long time, Ava didn't feel fear. She felt peace. She felt possibility. She felt the solid warmth of the man beside her, the small hand of the child who had tied their worlds together. And she knew this was the life she hadn't known she was waiting for. The storm had been long. The road had been hard. But they had survived it, not separately, but together. And together they would face whatever came next. To me, the ending of this story isn't just about love finally winning. It's about healing. Ava began as a woman who carried her life like a fortress, built from control, power, and a refusal to show weakness. Jack began as a man who had accepted a quiet life of survival, bearing his pain in work and the steady rhythm of fatherhood. Mia was the bridge neither of them expected, the innocent force that pulled down walls and revealed truths too improbable to plan. What I love most is that the shock twist, Jack being Mia's biological father, doesn't feel like a cheap coincidence, but rather a poetic inevitability. Life sometimes delivers the kind of truth that no business deal, no plan, no courtroom fight could ever arrange. It's that sense of fate, not destiny in a magical sense, but the fate that comes from human choices colliding in unexpected ways. The true triumph is that they don't end as just a couple, or even as a family. They end as something bigger. They build a dock, a place of learning and community, proof that out of scandal and loss and betrayal can rise something strong, real, and generous. It's a victory that isn't only personal but collective, which makes it far more powerful. In the end, the story tells us this: storms will come, headlines will break you, courts will challenge you, fate will twist you into knots. But if you find the right people to hold your hand on the dock when the wind howls, whether it's a mechanic, a businesswoman, or a child who sees clearer than anyone, then no ship in your life has to sink.